Sharon.
Okay, so for the last, oh geez, I don't know, 4 months, the Equity Advisory Committee has been working on creating a set of bylaws for itself. And the idea with the bylaws is there's been a lot of questions about just what is this committee doing, what is their goals, that sort of thing. So we thought that we'd set out, try to create a document that made that very clear of what people are doing, so the community knows, so the members know, and what the work is there. So we started with Oregon Senate Bill 732, which outlines the goals of what an Equity Advisory Committee is supposed to do. And then from there, we try to operationalize it. So go through and say, well, the Senate Bill 732 says what is supposed to be done. So we worked on how are we supposed to get that done, is really the idea. Now, this has been gone through, I don't know, 4 or 5 times by that committee, but we can still consider it as a draft for the board as we're thinking about what we're doing, what we're trying to do. And really, if we want to think about it, it's what's the practical way to do these things, right? Because a lot of these things are simply difficult to do, right? So beginning with the first one, part of the EAC's charge is that we're supposed to advise the school board about the educational equity impacts of policy decisions. So it would make sense that if the board needed to know that, then they would need to know what the committee thought before they did the review, right? That was the idea here. So the thought would be that the policies, as we got this policy packet, we would send it, because it takes a while for the board to get through it. Send that to the members of the committee and allow them to review it. And we were going to create sort of a Google sheet where people could create their comments. So we weren't using whole meetings to try and do it, and then kind of synthesize those in a meeting and then give them to the board as part of their deliberations over the policy work. Okay, that was the idea with that. Same idea with the ARs. Our board has been working on ARs. Typically, a board doesn't necessarily do that because those are operational instructions. So in this case, we said, well, we do the similar thing with ARs, but that information would go to the superintendent, and the district admin team would try and then adjust it, for equity. So that was the idea with that.
Can I ask a question about the ARs? Because I didn't see the ARs addressed in the Senate bill. From what I understand, it addresses policy only, and you did explain that it was operational in nature. So those, as a courtesy, those come to us.
Sure.
For review. So are you asking the advisory committee to review those in addition to policy?
Yeah, in some ways, the ARs are more important for them to look at than policies, because the ARs are how we actually do the policies, right? And so there's a lot of policies themselves, as you know, policies are often fairly short statements of things that we do, and administrative rules are really how you do them, and they're much longer. And if you're going to blow it in, because most of the laws and the policies are reviewed by 100 different lawyers or looked at different things. And so a lot of them are already thought about in terms of equity. The ARs themselves is the place where you can mess it up. And so that was kind of the idea with that. Now, it can go to the board as well, but we're trying to split it up so it wasn't all coming to the board all the time. So those are those pieces. And again, this is just a first time through. So as we go through that. The next piece is the piece that's probably, that was fairly easy for us to figure out as a committee as we talked through that. The next piece was really the part that has taken the most time to discuss. And perhaps is what the meat of the Equity Advisory Committee really is, or what people need it to be, is the piece of what happens when we have a bias incident in our district. What happens when we have something that's done in discriminatory nature? Part of what we'd like this committee to do is, well, according to what they're supposed to do, is they're supposed to give the board and the school district advice on how better to handle things. How better would you handle a situation that involves discrimination? How better would you work through a process like that? Now, that can get pretty touchy pretty fast for a lot of folks. So the thought was, well, how do we get that done? And so we went to our policies, and we talked about using the discrimination complaint form that's already in our policies, or using the bias incident complaints, and really use those policies that already exist. The basic idea was that a complaint would be made either by a student or by, if it was somebody on the committee, they wouldn't simply come to the committee and say, I've heard about this horrible thing that has happened and I want to talk about it. Because that's not a productive way to have a conversation. You only get one side of the story as you're going through it. So rather, the idea is that they would fill out the discrimination complaint form. It would go to the administration. The administration would then investigate it, work through it, come to the answers that they had. And then once the whole thing had been done, we'd bring the process back to the complaint committee or the committee without names, without schools, as best as possible to be as neutral, and talk about what happened and how the district handled it, and give the committee the opportunity to talk about what we should have done or some ideas. It's fairly easy when you're processing complaints in a school through disciplinary stuff to kind of run through it quickly. There's a lot to do, and sometimes there's work that needs to be done slower. More people need to get involved, more voices need to be heard. And this would give us an opportunity to refine our processes. So that's really what this is meant to do, at least these pieces of it. But this is hard because this is a small town. And in this town, I mean, it's, it kind of is and it isn't. It thinks of itself as a small town, even though it's 30,000. People are still connected pretty well. It's hard to have a discussion that's vanilla, right? It's not, people aren't attaching names and faces to it. So this has been the basis of the conversation the last few months, is trying to figure out how to do that. So I'll just stop for comments at this point.
Are these, you're talking about, these are coming in retroactively after something has been handled, right?
After already done, yeah. Okay. It's really not talking about the thing, rather
It's
talking
like, it's armchair quarterbacking, and
Yeah.
we may find things have been handled well,
yeah,
and that hopefully that's most of those that come up
that is
that we
cool.
get to evaluate.
Yeah.
But this is a tool to help our district do equity better. And some time to do some self-reflecting and give feedback. So I think it's a tool.
Did I read this right in the bill? I went through it. So for districts that have less than 10,000, we we're not required to put this into effect until September 15th of 2025.
That's correct.
Okay. So
So
I know
why are we doing it now?
yeah,
Well,
because we're spending a lot of time and a lot of resources, and I know there's so much more going on in the district right now. So I think that's.
So sure, long before I came, developing in the district's continuous improvement plan, there was a call for an equity task force run by the superintendent. Okay, that was been part of the planning in this district for the last 5 years.
So where does that come from?
That's from the continuous improvement plan.
Okay, so but like from ODE or?
No, that was part of our plan. It was approved. It was approved by the ODE, but it was part of the plan that the school district set up. And so when I came on, that was part of the plan that hadn't been done. The board asked me to do that. That was one of my goals last year. And so I started working on the equity task force. And so that was something we were continuing to do. We were working on it, trying to create really a system where we could talk about equity, a place where people that needed to talk about how our schools were running in terms of that was doing it. When this equity bill was passed, it made a lot of sense to transition what was the equity task force into this process, simply because we already had it in place. The board had asked me to do it, and it made sense not to run an equity task force and then later do this equity advisory committee. Rather, we said, let's take that law that seems to be what their intention and just go ahead and put it in there. So that's why it's there.
What was the process for the committee members? Because reading through the bill, it sounds like it was, there's an application process.
Right.
We go out to the community, and especially when we're hearing feedback from citizens on wanting to have more engagement.
Yeah.
We heard the last meeting.
Right.
I'm just curious on what that application.
So
process
on
looked
this one, this was done, well, almost 2 years ago now. And so we put out an application at the time, we as people in the school district, that was before this bill existed. We put out an application. I think we got 50 or 60 applicants from around it. We went through, we as in members of the district team, went through and tried to create a balanced group as much as we could. And then we invited people to be part of that. For students, we put calls out to through our principals to see if they can find folks who would be interested in that. We had those students apply, and really we only had a few, and we took them all. So there's 4 of that. So we did our best to be pretty well. We saw a pretty good list of people that like to be involved that weren't part of this. Now, of course, we can go back through this after the board decides how this works, and we can try and, the board to approve the people that are on it. We can, do application process moving forward. The people that are in it have been committed for the last year and a half, though, and they're committed to help us out.
But it sounds like it's changed from what it was originally with the equity task plan to now what it is today. And per the bill, the application process has changed.
Well, a little bit.
Yeah.
It's changed that the board now approves them.
Yeah.
And we can definitely get to that once we feel like we've got the bylaws in place.
And I feel like when I read the bill and then I read the bylaws, there was a process for selecting the members of the task force. But I'm not sure that that's a function of this committee. So I'm a little bit confused on that. The bylaws don't necessarily say what the board is going to do. It says what the committee is going to do.
Sure. The school boards generally don't do anything. You approve things, you look at things, you look at stuff. The staff brings you things. The staff develops things, they bring you things and to look at. So in this case, we could change it to say, the district staff will solicit for folks and will bring you a list of recommendations. I mean, that's something we could do unless you want to set up another committee to do that.
Yeah, I just found it interesting when I read the bill versus and I've only been a part of the Equity Advisory Committee since we had our first meeting. Was it November this year? October?
It was October.
But after reading the bill, I'm like, I feel like we're going into it kind of backwards because we had started this advisory group. But what the bill is asking us to do, that this is very, very much board driven. And the board, well, at least the board that's here now, didn't set up that advisory committee. So it feels like we're kind of going backwards into it. And because this is very important work and can cause friction throughout our community and between individuals, I kind of feel like we need to figure out, the board needs to understand what they want as their committee. And when I was reading the bylaws compared to the law, I was like, well, we are kind of going backwards. We have people recommending and working on bylaws, but the board never really approved the committee that's there working on the bylaws now. So I'm like, okay, so we're kind of going backwards. And I know there's people that have been in there working on this.
The board didn't task me to do that. So
Yeah.
it wasn't that the board didn't do that.
Yeah, no, I'm
So-
thinking, because it's kind of like this advisory group was
Sure.
here
Right.
and we filtered it in. And I didn't read the law until Carrie had asked it to come out to the board, which, and then after reading it, I'm like, wait a minute. So there is this confusion for me too on like, should we be more as a board intimately involved in understanding and figuring out these, ground rules for the committee? And this is a great start. I'm just wondering if maybe we need to put this into a work session where we really kind of dive in and the board says, okay, what do we want it to be based on the law and what they're requiring from us? And how do we want to go about that? So
If the board would like to dig into this and work on that, that's great. Happy to.
I think that I don't agree with taking the work that's been done and setting it backwards, setting it back. This was something the last board asked Sharon to do. The application process was open and available to everybody interested. I mean, the amount of time hasn't been board time. I mean, it's been these volunteers who have shown up consistently to dedicate their time. They are advisory in nature. They just make recommendations that the board either accepts or does not. You know, I think as evidenced by Ms. Berry, who spoke earlier, and by some personal experiences that I've had this week, equity in our district can't wait. People are being harmed with all kind of bias incidents that go unreported because people are unclear about the process and unclear that they would even be believed. We need to fix that. And I don't think bringing this work to a full stop so we are more comfortable with it is going to be productive. My concern is that outcomes for students are positive, and in some of our schools and in our community for that matter, outside of our buildings, there are events that are causing young people real harm. And if the least we can do as a board is make sure what happens within our buildings is equitable, so kids have opportunity for improved outcomes. That's what I'm concerned about. And I think tweaking, if that needs to be done, but for us to pull the plug, go back to the drawing board, I think sends a message to historically disenfranchised people in our schools and in our community that this isn't something that we that this is not a priority.
Yeah, I actually hadn't thoughts along those lines but in that people's voices not being heard or not knowing the processes.
Yeah.
That actually was part of what I was wrestling with. And my concern with this, first of all, I think that there's some more meat and potatoes that need to come into, there's steps that need to come into this, these things that I'd like to see. I'm not saying that we need to say this is what the Equity Advisory Board needs to do, but I definitely have some suggestions. But my concern is confidentiality and liability for the district. And if somebody is afraid that they're not going to be believed now, you're telling me that I'm going to fill out this complaint and it's going to go in front of a group of how many people are on there now? 20 people.
Well, it goes to the building.
The complaint
admin
doesn't go
first.
to the
Right.
committee.
You don't see that.
More of like a summary.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more of a summary of what happened, what the actions were.
Right.
Kind of
But
summary process,
so
right.
I'm bringing this complaint, it's going to go through the process, and then it's going to go back to a board of, or a committee of 20 people.
Roughly.
But all it's coming to the Equity Advisory Committee to do is evaluate, were we successful in addressing the bias complaint?
Yeah, I'm just worried that that's going to be another barrier for people to fill out a complaint, because we know we say something, guess what? It's going to go back and be recycled into this. That's going to end up on social media, the potential to end up on social media and whatever. I talked about it wherever. So for me, I need to see that in these bylaws. I need to see how we're going to protect confidentiality. I need to see those things. It's a big concern to me with kids, and we have students on here.
And what I'm saying, I'm not saying scrap it. What I'm
Right.
saying is let's
Yeah.
have a work session where we really dive into this and we talk about what we want from that Equity Advisory Committee for the board. What do we like? We refer back to the law and then we look at what has already been written up and we say, okay, how is this really, like, what do we want? And just like confidentiality, okay, we need something like this so we can really pinpoint. And so it's not during a board meeting where we're trying to get through a whole bunch of stuff, but a work session where we dive into this and we talk about what is this committee meant for? How do we want it to benefit the board? Because it's an advisory committee to the board based
Yeah.
on the law,
Mhm.
so that we can make good decisions and change outcomes for students. So that's what I'm saying right now, is that to try to get through this, I mean, we can spend all night long sitting here diving into it, but we need more information, and we need to talk as a board about what do we want this to look like?
Are you going to solicit the information that you feel is missing from perhaps the chair of the Equity Advisory Committee? Or are we just going to be, are we
What's
going
the
to
process?
be in an echo chamber of this is what
Yeah,
we?
we have a chair for the stuff.
I mean, I
That's
don't,
not in the bylaws. I would think that that process would be in the bylaws of selecting
So, I mean, and again,
and voting. There's
that would be like in our discussion, who do we want to bring in to advise us? Like to do this? Do we want the chair? Or do we want other people that have been
Or
there?
is it
But,
staff that have access to.
but we still have to set, what do we want this committee to be? After reading the law, I was like, we really haven't spent a time actually sitting down going, okay, what do we want this committee to be? And how do we want them to truly advise us? We have these ground rules and that's great, but then it brings up like the what ifs and the how do we do this? And so to me, I feel we need more time to spend on this to really do justice and understand what it is we're doing with that committee. So it doesn't become just something
Yeah.
that people are volunteering for and their voices aren't being really felt like anything's happening or being heard,
Mhm.
is my point. So it's not, let's just scrap it forever
Just
and
figuring
be
out the
gone.
relationship.
It's let's
Yeah.
figure this out. From the board level, we've got some ground. Let's spend some quality time, not in a board meeting, in a work session to go through this.
And so you're
Figure it
asking,
out.
who do we have from the equity advisory?
well, yeah,
Discussion.
because I mean, I think the folks that have volunteered to spend their time on the Equity Advisory Committee have a lived experience. And I wouldn't recommend that they be invited because I think that those kinds of conversations have potential to do real harm to some folks. But there are other people that have expertise in this area. Some are on our staff, some are.
Well, let me suggest this. When we first started the Equity Task Force, we contracted with Erica McAlpin from Oregon State University Cascades. She helped us sort of get started as our advisor in setting things up and working through that. I would suggest that if the board's going to do that and dive into it, we hire a consultant, an expert in equity and diversity, to come in and give us some real suggestions about how to set up something like this that is productive and useful.
Yeah, and I thought when Erica, because she did the presentation with the advisory committee, but were we supposed to have some follow-up time with her?
We did. We didn't end up using it because we kind of moved down a different track. But she's a local expert in the area. Works with many boards around the area for that. It seems to me that for the things you folks are describing, we don't have any expertise in the room for that.
I would love to have Erica come and work with this body to refine. I mean, she does a pretty standard diversity, equity, and inclusion presentation, but I don't think that's what we should ask of her.
No,
It should be something.
I just think that helping us set something like this up, probably having an expert to help us out would be a good
I
idea.
think that's a great idea. If people are open to that.
And we can do that during a work session and.
We
dive
sure
into
can.
it.
We've got a lot
Yeah.
of things stacked up in the work sessions at the moment, so we'll have to designate.
It's important work.
I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah.
And especially now seeing, because I was trying to figure out how this came about and the equity task plan. Now it makes sense how we kind of backed into this. And the work is important. And I think that there are community members who are looking at the advisory task force and they're wondering what's coming from it. And we even saw some of that feedback in the evaluations of it's not moving quick enough. And so I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, it's been a challenge. There's a lot of people that don't think it should exist at all. And then there's a lot of folks that think it's going too slow. It's been a challenge to try and that's been part of why my focus has been about trying to develop bylaws or something like that that are clear about what we're doing, why we're doing it, what the procedures are. So yeah, I mean, I think bringing some expertise in on this to help help the board to develop something they're comfortable with. It feels like it does the job. I think it makes a lot of sense.
So are we gonna, can I make a motion to move the bylaws into a work session?
Do we even need a
Or-
motion?
We don't need to. We can
We
just
don't need a
do that.
motion.
Yeah, this wasn't put here as an approval item. It was put here as an information item.
So how do we make sure we move forward with contracting with a facilitator or model facilitator to make that happen?
We can set a date for when we'd like to do that. I can give her a call and we can try and set something up,
I would imagine that comes with a cost.
of course. She gave us a decent deal last time. I can work with that. She's not inexpensive, but
And we have hours left on.
And it sounds like there was.
I was like, we have hours on the clock, right?
we paid her for her time so far.
Okay.
But the work is important and, we need somebody who can really help guide us through it.
That would be great. All right.
Thank you.